Can the little one endure it? The question shatters the chapel silence like a gunshot. Every soul in Redemption Creek leans forward as Jonah Mercer, 6'7" of sun-scorched muscle and whispered legend, poses the challenge to a bride half his size. Lila Hart's fingers tremble around her bouquet, but her chin lifts. This isn't romance. It's reckoning. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The late afternoon sun hammered down on Redemption Creek like God's own forge, turning the dust on Main Street into a fine golden haze that caught in throats and stung eyes. The Union Pacific locomotive had screeched to a halt at the weathered platform 40 minutes prior, belching steam and cinders into the cloudless Montana sky. From that mechanical beast had emerged perhaps a dozen passengers, cattlemen in worn Stetsons, a family of homesteaders clutching bundles, two painted ladies heading for the saloon row, and one small woman in a dove-gray traveling dress that had seen better days. Lila Hart. She stood now at the altar of the Redemption Creek Community Church, a whitewashed building that leaned slightly to the left, as if the wind itself had tried to push it over and settled for a permanent nudge. The pews creaked with the weight of what seemed like every breathing soul within 20 miles. Ranchers with dirt under their fingernails, shopkeepers in their Sunday vests, women in calico and worn lace who had walked miles through sagebrush to witness this spectacle. Because that's what it was, a spectacle. Jonah Mercer stood across from her, and standing was perhaps an inadequate verb for what he did. He occupied space the way a mountain does, inevitable and immovable. 6 feet 7 inches if he was a centimeter, with shoulders that stretched the seams of his black Sunday coat, the only formal garment he owned, borrowed from the undertaker because no store-bought clothing fit his frame. His hands, rough and scarred from decades of rope and rain, hung at his sides like sledgehammers temporarily at rest. His face was a geography of hard living, sun-carved lines around eyes the color of winter ice, a jaw that looked like it had been hewn from granite with a dull chisel, and a nose that had been broken at least twice and set imperfectly each time. He was 43 years old. She was 26. He owned 4,000 acres of the most profitable ranch in 3 counties. She owned a battered trunk, $17 in coins sewn into her hem, and a debt back in Philadelphia that would take a working girl 5 years to clear, if the collectors didn't find her first. Reverend Bartholomew Pritchard, a thin scarecrow of a man whose Adam's apple bobbed nervously above his clerical collar, cleared his throat for the 3rd time. His Bible shook slightly in his age-spotted hands. He had presided over weddings, funerals, and the occasional hasty baptism for 30 years in this hard country, but this ceremony carried a tension that made his palms sweat. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice reedy but carrying in the hushed space, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate instituted by God." "Get to the part where we say the words, Reverend." Jonah's voice was like stones grinding together, deep and rough-edged. Not cruel, but carrying no patience either. Sun's burning daylight. A ripple of nervous laughter rolled through the pews. Lila's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the sorry excuse for a bouquet someone had thrust into her hands when she'd climbed down from the wagon that brought her from the depot. Wildflowers already wilting in the heat, tied with a scrap of yellow ribbon. Pritchard bobbed his head. "Yes, of course, Mr. Mercer. Let us proceed then to—" "But first," Jonah interrupted, and now his winter blue eyes fixed on Lila with an intensity that should have made her step back. She didn't. "I got a question for the bride." The church went so quiet you could hear the flies buzzing against the window glass. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied. Lila felt every eye in the building settle on her like a physical weight. She was small, 5'3" in her worn button boots, with dark chestnut hair pinned in a simple arrangement that was already losing its battle with the Montana wind. Her face was oval, pale from too many months indoors, with hazel eyes that tilted slightly at the corners, and a mouth that might have been called generous if it weren't pressed into such a tight line. She looked like a sparrow confronting a hawk. "A question," she repeated, and was grateful her voice came out steady. "Before we're wed?" "Before we're wed," Jonah confirmed. He shifted his weight, and the floorboards groaned. "Because after, well, That's when the question becomes a reality instead of a wondering. Someone in the back pews giggled nervously and was immediately shushed, Jonah's scarred hands clasped behind his back, the gesture somehow making him look even larger, more imposing. His gaze never left Lila's face. "You're a little bit of a thing," he said, and there was no malice in it, just observation, the way a man might comment on the weather or the price of cattle. "I'm not. Most folks around here will tell you I'm too damn big for regular furniture, door frames, and decent society. I break things without meaning to. Horses spook when I mount them the first time. Dogs bark." A few knowing chuckles from the men in the congregation. Lila saw movement in her peripheral vision, women leaning toward each other, whispering behind gloved hands. Her spine straightened fractionally. "Now, I wrote you letters," Jonah continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the small church. "And you wrote back. We made an arrangement. Your letter said you were practical, hardworking, not prone to hysterics or vapors. Said you understood what frontier life meant. Said you'd be a good wife to a rancher who needed one." "I said all those things," Lila agreed. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage, but she kept her face composed. "And I meant them." "I'm sure you did." Jonah's expression was unreadable, not unkind, but not warm either, just assessing. But there's a difference between meaning something in a letter and facing up to it in the flesh. "So I'm asking you now, straight out, in front of God and everybody." He leaned forward slightly, and even that small movement made him seem to fill the entire front of the church. The late sun streaming through the western windows caught him in silhouette, turning him into something even more massive, more mythic. When he spoke again, his voice dropped lower, more intimate, but somehow still audible to every straining ear. "Can the little one endure it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lila felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back hot. Her fingers turned white-knuckled around the wilting wildflowers. She understood exactly what he was asking, and exactly what he wasn't saying aloud, but every person in this church was thinking. The wedding night, the physical reality of a man his size and a woman her stature, the crude mathematics of flesh and bone, and the fundamental inequality of the marriage bed. But there was something else in his question, too, something broader. Could she endure the isolation of a ranch miles from town? The brutal winters? The endless work? Could she endure being Mrs. Jonah Mercer, wife of a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm? Behind her, she heard a woman whisper, "Poor little thing," like putting a canary in with a mountain cat. Another voice, male, amused, "My money says she's back on the eastbound train within a month." "A week," someone countered, "soon as she sees the size of—" "Hush!" An older woman's scandalized hiss cut off the speculation, but the damage was done. Lila felt the assessment, the judgment, the way they'd already written the ending to the story before it had barely begun. She thought about the letter that had brought her here. Not the cheerful, carefully penned responses she'd written to Jonah Mercer's advertisement in the Matrimonial News, but the other letter. The one that had arrived 3 months ago in Philadelphia, written in her younger sister Rosie's desperate scrawl. "Lila, he found us. Mr. Carmichael's collectors came to the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher turned me out when I couldn't pay. I'm sleeping at the church now, but Reverend Marcus says I can't stay much longer. They say Papa's debt is mine now too, since you left. They say they'll put me in the workhouse if someone doesn't settle accounts. Please, Lila, I'm only 16. I'm so scared." Lila had read that letter until the paper wore soft at the creases. She'd looked at her own situation, 6 days a week in the textile mill, wages that barely covered her closet-sized room, and 2 meals a day. The foreman's increasingly bold suggestions about how she might improve her circumstances. She'd counted the coins she'd been saving for 3 years, realized they'd never add up to enough to clear their father's gambling debts and bring Rosie West safely. And then she'd seen the advertisement, established rancher, financially secure, seeks practical woman for marriage. Must be of good character, hardworking, and willing to build life in Montana territory. Age and beauty less important than temperament and capability. Respond to J. Mercer, General Delivery, Redemption Creek. She'd taken the gamble. Exchanged 6 letters with a man whose handwriting was cramped and unpracticed, but whose words suggested a kind of rough honesty. When he'd sent the train ticket and $20 for travel expenses, she'd used 15 of it to wire money to Rosie with instructions to stay with Reverend Marcus until further notice, used 3 for food and necessities for the journey, and saved the remaining 2. Every mile of the journey west, through Pennsylvania's coal country, across Ohio's farmland, into the great prairies that seemed to go on forever, through the mountains that made her ears pop and her heart race, she'd hardened herself. By the time she reached Montana, she'd promised herself something fundamental. She would never be helpless again. She would negotiate her own terms. She would survive whatever she had to survive, but she would do it as a participant in her own life, not a victim of circumstance. Now, standing in this church with every eye on her, Lila made a decision. She lifted her chin and met Jonah Mercer's winter blue eyes without flinching. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly, not loud, but crystalline in its certainty. That depends entirely on what we're enduring. A collective intake of breath rippled through the congregation. Even Reverend Pritchard's eyes widened. Jonah's expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "Ma'am, you ask if the little one can endure it," Lila continued, and now she was committed, words flowing out of her like water from a broken dam. "But it covers considerable territory, doesn't it, Mr. Mercer? If you're asking whether I can survive a Montana winter, work a ranch, learn the skills I'll need to be useful, yes, I can and will endure that. If you're asking whether I'll run at the first hardship, the answer is no. I don't run." She paused, her heart hammering, knowing what she was about to say would either end this wedding before it began or change its fundamental nature. "But if you're asking whether I'll endure being treated as property, as something broken in and subdued, as a creature without voice or choice," she shook her head slowly, "then we need a different conversation before any vows are spoken." The church erupted. "Well, I'll be damned," a rancher in the third pew slapped his knee. "The nerve," a woman in the front gasped. "Speaking to Mr. Mercer like that?" "I like her already," someone else said, laughing. "She'll be on that train by sundown," another voice predicted darkly. Jonah held up one massive hand and the murmuring ceased as abruptly as if he'd fired a gun. He studied Lila with those pale eyes, and she couldn't read what she saw there. The silence stretched so long that the wilting flowers in her hands trembled from the tension in her grip. Then Jonah Mercer did something unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile, exactly. There was too much edge to it, too much hard living and harder choices. But it was genuine, crinkling the sun-carved lines around his eyes and revealing teeth that were surprisingly even, despite the broken nose and scarred knuckles. "Well now," he said slowly, "that's a different kind of answer than I expected." "Should I have simpered and blushed?" Lila asked, finding courage from some reserve she hadn't known she possessed. "Assured you I'd be a docile, grateful little wife who'd never question anything? Most would have. I'm not most. Clearly." He rocked back on his heels, as much as a man that large could rock, and scratched his jaw with one scarred hand. "You got a spine in you after all. Good. Weak things don't last long out here." "I am not a thing at all," Lila said quietly, but with steel underneath. Weak or otherwise. The church had gone silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, anticipatory. Everyone leaning forward to see what would happen next. This wasn't the wedding they'd expected, the foregone conclusion of a desperate woman and a powerful man. This was something else entirely. Jonah turned to Reverend Pritchard. "Reverend, I need to have a word with my almost wife, in private." Pritchard blinked rapidly. "But the ceremony, the congregation, can wait 5 damn minutes." Jonah's tone brooked no argument. He looked at Lila. "Unless you object." She should object. Every rule of propriety said she should, but propriety had never done her any favors, and she sensed something important was happening here, some negotiation that needed to occur away from all these watching eyes. 5 minutes, she agreed. Jonah gestured toward a side door that led to the small vestry. Lila gathered her gray skirts and followed, feeling the weight of dozens of stairs on her back. Behind her, the congregation exploded into excited chatter the moment the door closed. The vestry was cramped and stuffy, smelling of old paper and candle wax. A small window looked out on a patch of scrub grass in the edge of the churchyard. Jonah's bulk made the space seem even smaller, and Lila was suddenly intensely aware of how alone they were. He didn't move toward her, though. Instead, he leaned against the wall, carefully, as if mindful of his weight, and regarded her with those unnerving pale eyes. "You're scared," he observed. "Of course I'm scared. No point lying about it. I'm marrying a stranger in a strange place, with no friends, no family, and no way back if things go wrong. But you came anyway." "I had my reasons." "The debt," Jonah said, and Lila's blood went cold. "Yeah, I know about that. Had a friend in Philadelphia make some inquiries after your third letter. Patrick Hart's gambling debts passed to his daughters when he drank himself to death. Collectors looking for you and your sister." He paused. "You didn't mention any of that in your letters." Lila's chin came up defensively. "Would you have sent the ticket if I had? Would you have wanted a wife who came with that kind of trouble?" "Probably not," he admitted. "But I appreciate you not lying when I asked direct questions. You just left things out, which is different." "Is that why you asked your question in front of everyone?" Bitterness crept into her voice. "To humiliate me? To show everyone that you knew I was desperate?" "No." He shook his head slowly. "I asked because I needed to know what kind of woman you really are. Not on paper, in letters where you got time to think and write pretty words, but under pressure, with everyone watching, when running would be easier than standing." "And what kind of woman am I?" "The stubborn kind," Jonah said. "The kind that fights. Good. You'll need that here." Lila felt something unknot in her chest, though she remained wary. "So you don't want a docile wife?" "Hell no. What would I do with docile?" He snorted. "Ranch doesn't run itself. Life out here is hard. You'll need to make decisions when I'm not there, handle problems, keep things going. Can't do that if you're waiting for permission to breathe." "Then why the question about enduring?" Jonah was quiet for a moment, his expression turning serious. "Because I am what I am, Lila Hart. I'm big, I'm rough, and I've got a reputation in this territory. Some of it's earned, some of it's exaggeration. But either way, being my wife won't be easy. People will talk. They'll watch you, judge you, wait for you to fail." He paused. "And when we're alone, He gestured vaguely, awkwardly. "There's a physical reality we'll have to navigate. I can be gentle. I will be. But I needed to know you understood what you were signing up for, that you weren't walking in blind." Something in his awkwardness, this giant of a man stumbling over words about intimacy, made Lila's fear recede slightly. He wasn't trying to intimidate her. He was trying, in his clumsy way, to be honest. "I'm not a child," she said quietly. "I understand what marriage entails, and I'm not made of glass." "No, I don't suppose you are." He studied her. "But you got conditions. You said we need a different conversation, so let's have it. What do you need from this marriage, besides escape from those debts?" This was her moment, the chance she'd been calculating since the train pulled into the station. Lila reached into the small pocket sewn into her traveling dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn from much handling. She'd written it 3 nights ago, sitting in a swaying train car, lamp oil burning low while other passengers slept around her. "Terms," she said simply, holding it out. Jonah took the paper gingerly, as if afraid his rough hands might tear it. He unfolded it with surprising care and began to read. His lips moved slightly as he worked through her careful script. Lila waited, her heart hammering. She'd written, "Terms of marriage between Lila Hart and Jonah Mercer." 1. My sister Rosie, age 16, will be brought west within 6 months. She will live with us until she's of age or chooses to marry. 2. I will receive a monthly allowance of $20 for personal expenses, no questions asked about its use. 3. Any business I establish, be it sewing, teaching, or other enterprise, remains in my name. Profits are mine to keep or dispose of as I see fit. 4. I will learn ranching skills and participate in decision-making about the ranch operations. I am not to be kept ignorant or excluded. 5. Physical relations to occur only with mutual agreement. I will not be forced or coerced. 6. Should you die before me, I inherit the ranch or am given sufficient means to support myself. I will not be left destitute. 7. My name remains Lila Hart Mercer. I do not disappear into Mrs. Mercer entirely. 8. This agreement to be witnessed and notarized, legally binding. The silence as Jonah read seemed to stretch forever. Lila watched his face, trying to gauge his reaction. His expression gave away nothing. When he finally looked up, his eyes were unreadable. This is quite a list. Those are my terms, Lila said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I won't marry without them. Even though you're in debt? Even though you got nowhere else to go? Especially because of that. She met his gaze squarely. I may be desperate, Mr. Mercer, but I'm not willing to trade one kind of bondage for another. If you want a wife, I'll be a good one, hardworking, loyal, capable. But I won't be property. I won't be voiceless. Jonah looked down at the paper again, his brow furrowed. Outside the vestry, the congregation's restless murmuring filtered through the door. They'd been in here longer than 5 minutes. People would be speculating about what was happening. Number 5, Jonah said suddenly. The one about physical relations. Lila's cheeks heated, but she didn't look away. What about it? I'm not a man who forces women, he said, and there was a hard edge to his voice now, almost offended. Never have been, never will be. You'll have no cause to fear that from me. I don't know you well enough to know what to fear or not fear, Lila replied honestly. That's why it needs to be written down. Not because I think you're a monster, but because I need to know I have the right to say no. He absorbed that, nodded slowly. Fair enough? He tapped the paper. Number 2, $20 is more than most ranch hands make in a month. I know, but I need to be able to send money to Rosie without asking permission. And I may need things, women's things, that I don't want to have to explain or justify. And number 3, you planning to compete with my ranch? No. I'm planning to have something of my own, something that doesn't depend on your goodwill or whether I please you. She paused. In Philadelphia, I saw what happened to women who had nothing. When their husbands died or left or just decided to stop being kind, they had nothing. I won't be that vulnerable. Jonah was quiet again, his scarred fingers drumming slowly against his thigh. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a low, rough sound like distant thunder. You are something else, Lila Hart. He shook his head. Most women would be so grateful just to get a husband and a home, they'd never think to negotiate terms. Are you refusing? Her heart sank. Hell no. He looked at her with something that might have been admiration. I'm agreeing. Lila blinked. You... what? I'm agreeing to your terms. All of them. He held up the paper. We'll get this witnessed and notarized. Doc Halloran's got a notary seal. He can make it official. Your sister can come west soon as we can arrange travel. You'll get your allowance, keep your business money, learn ranching, and... He stumbled slightly over the next part. And we'll proceed at whatever pace you're comfortable with. As for the inheritance, I was planning to provide for you anyway. Only seems fair? Lila stared at him, unable to quite believe what she was hearing. Why would you agree to all this? Jonah shrugged his massive shoulders. Because I'm 43 years old, and I've spent enough time on this earth to know that partnerships work better than dictatorships. I need a wife who's capable and strong, not broken and resentful. If giving you these terms means I get that kind of partner, he held out one scarred hand. Then it's a bargain I'm willing to make. Lila looked at his outstretched hand. It was enormous, calloused, marked with old scars and new scrapes. The hand of a man who worked hard and lived harder, but it was extended to her as an equal, not a supplicant. She placed her smaller hand in his. His grip was careful, warm despite the calluses. Partners, then, she said. Partners, he agreed. Though I'll warn you, I'm not always easy to get along with. I got a temper, I'm stubborn as a mule with a burr under its saddle, and I've been living alone so long I've forgotten half my manners. And I'm willful, opinionated, and I don't suffer fools gladly, Lila countered. So we're evenly matched. He grinned, that same hard-edged smile, but warmer now. I think we might be at that. He released her hand and gestured to the door. Ready to face that crowd again and finish this thing proper? As ready as I'll ever be. They returned to the chapel together, and the congregation's chatter cut off instantly. Every face turned toward them, hungry for scandal or drama, or whatever scrap of gossip they could carry home. Jonah strode to the center of the altar space and held up the paper Lila had given him. Before we proceed with the ceremony, he announced in that grinding stone voice, there's going to be some changes to how this works. Murmuring rippled through the pews. Reverend Pritchard looked nervous. Miss Hart and I have come to an agreement, Jonah continued. A contract, you might say, about how this marriage is going to function. It's got terms, conditions, things we've both agreed to. That's highly irregular, Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, called out from the third row. Marriage is a sacred covenant, not a business arrangement. Marriage is both, Lila said, surprising herself with her boldness. She moved to stand beside Jonah, facing the congregation. And if we're going to make vows, we're going to make ones that reflect the reality of our partnership. Partnership, someone laughed. Listen to her. I am listening, Jonah said, and his voice dropped to a dangerous quiet that shut everyone up faster than shouting would have. And I suggest you all do the same. Miss Hart is about to become my wife, which means she's under my protection. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. We clear? The threat in his tone was unmistakable. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but there were also nods, particularly from some of the older ranchers who understood the code being invoked. Now then, Jonah turned to Reverend Pritchard. We need Doc Halloran up here with his notary seal. This contract gets signed and witnessed before any vows get spoken. Pritchard looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at Jonah's face changed his mind. Someone fetch Dr. Halloran. A boy scrambled out of the pews and ran outside. While they waited, Lila stood beside Jonah, feeling the weight of the congregation's collective judgment. But she also felt something else, Jonah's solid presence beside her, not looming over her but standing with her. It was an unfamiliar feeling, having someone at her back. Dr. Halloran arrived, wiping his hands on a cloth. He'd been interrupted during a house call. He was a compact man with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked at the paper Jonah handed him, then at Lila, then back at the paper. This is unorthodox, he said mildly. So is most of my life, Jonah replied. Can you notarize it or not? Oh, I can, just making sure this is what both parties want. He looked at Lila. Miss Hart, you understand what you're signing? I wrote it, Lila said. I understand perfectly. And you, Jonah? You're agreeing to all these terms freely? I am. Doc Halloran pulled out his notary kit from the bag he'd brought. All right then, I'll need 2 witnesses besides myself. I'll stand witness. A voice came from the back of the church. A woman pushed through the crowd, tall, graying, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in the sun. She wore men's trousers and a work shirt and carried herself with casual authority. Martha Brennan, she introduced herself to Lila. I run the neighboring ranch, and I think what you're doing here is the smartest thing I've seen a woman do in 20 years. I'll witness too. Another voice, male this time, a rancher in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard. Tom Gardner, known Jonah since he first came to the territory. About time someone made him put his promises on paper. Jonah shot him a look that promised a conversation later, but Tom just grinned. The contract was laid out on a small table the Reverend used for communion. Doc Halloran produced a pen and ink. Lila signed first, her hands steady despite the trembling in her knees. Then Jonah, his signature cramped and unpracticed but legible. Martha and Tom added their names. Finally, Doc Halloran affixed his notary seal with a satisfying thump. There, he said, handing the document to Lila. Legally binding. Congratulations, you just negotiated the most unusual marriage contract in Montana territory. A few people actually clapped. Others looked scandalized. Lila carefully folded the paper and tucked it into her bodice, feeling its presence there like armor. Now, Jonah said, turning back to Reverend Pritchard, can we get married, or do you need to take another break? Pritchard, looking a bit dazed, nodded and raised his Bible. Very well, let us proceed. Dearly beloved, we are gathered. The short version, Reverend, Jonah reminded him. Yes, of course. Pritchard flipped through pages with trembling fingers. Do you, Jonah Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Jonah said simply. And do you, Lila Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part. Lila looked up at the giant of a man beside her. He was rough, intimidating, with a reputation that preceded him like a storm warning. But he'd listened to her terms. He'd agreed to treat her as a partner. He'd stood beside her in front of everyone and defended her right to negotiate her own marriage. It wasn't love. It might never be love. But it was respect, which in some ways was more valuable. "I do," she said clearly. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Pritchard looked relieved to have reached this point. "You may kiss the bride." Jonah looked down at Lila. For the first time since they'd met, she saw uncertainty in his winter blue eyes. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His lips brushed hers. Briefly, carefully, a gesture more formal than passionate. His beard scratched her chin. He smelled of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. When he pulled back, there was faint color in his weathered cheeks. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, testing out the name. "Lila Hart Mercer," she corrected, and was rewarded with another of those hard-edged smiles. The congregation erupted into applause and conversation. People pressed forward to offer congratulations, most to Jonah, some to Lila. Martha Brennan gripped her hand firmly. "You ever need anything?" she said quietly. "My ranch is 10 miles north. Don't be a stranger." "Thank you," Lila said, grateful for the kindness. The next hour passed in a blur. There was a reception of sorts in the churchyard, trestle tables laden with food the church ladies had prepared, a fiddle player who appeared from somewhere, and enough whiskey flowing to loosen tongues and inhibitions. Lila found herself passed from one conversation to another, answering the same questions about where she came from and whether she understood what frontier life entailed, all while maintaining a pleasant expression that made her face ache. Jonah stayed nearby, not hovering, but present. She noticed how people deferred to him, how conversations changed when he approached. His reputation was built on more than just his size, she realized. There was real respect here, mixed with wariness. These people knew him as someone capable of both rough justice and surprising generosity. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose, Jonah appeared at her elbow. "Time to go," he said quietly, "unless you want to spend your wedding night answering nosy questions." "God, no!" The words escaped before she could catch them, and Jonah laughed. "Come on then, wagon's ready." They made their goodbyes, or Jonah made them, while Lila stood beside him, nodding and smiling until her cheeks hurt. Finally, they escaped to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. Her battered trunk was already loaded in the back. Jonah helped her up onto the bench seat with a hand under her elbow, his touch gentle despite his strength. Then he swung up beside her, the wagon creaking under his weight. He took up the reins, clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. Redemption Creek fell away behind them as they headed north into open country. The road, barely more than 2 ruts worn into the prairie, stretched ahead through grassland that rolled like a gold-green sea. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. Lila had never seen so much open space in her life. In Philadelphia, buildings crowded close, blocking the sky. Here, the sky went on forever, huge and blue and so bright it made her eyes water. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harness, and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jonah said after they'd traveled in silence for several miles. "Terrifying," Lila answered honestly. "All this emptiness. What if you get lost?" "You learn the landmarks. That peak," he pointed to a distinctive mountain with a notched summit. "That's Eagle's Crest. You can see it from anywhere in the valley. And that line of cottonwoods means water. Follow water. You'll find civilization eventually." He glanced at her. "You'll learn. Takes time, but you'll learn." "How far to your ranch?" "About an hour yet. We're crossing open range now, land nobody owns but everybody uses. My property starts at that line of fence posts you'll see coming up." The fence posts appeared gradually, rough-cut timber marking a boundary across the prairie. As they crossed that invisible line, Lila felt a shift, like entering a different territory. The land looked the same, but knowing it belonged to Jonah, belonged to them now, in a legal sense, made it feel different. They passed cattle bearing Jonah's brand, a simple JM mark on the left flank. They passed a line shack where seasonal hands would stay during roundup. They passed a creek that ran clear and cold, with willows trailing their branches in the current. "This is all yours?" Lila asked, awed despite herself. 4,000 acres, Jonah confirmed. "Took me 20 years to build it up from nothing. Started with 100 head of cattle and a tent. Now," he gestured at the landscape. "This." There was pride in his voice, but not arrogance. This was earned pride. The satisfaction of hard work transformed into something substantial. As the sun touched the mountaintops, the ranch house came into view. It was larger than Lila had expected, a 2-story structure built of timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Not elegant, but solid and well-built. Beside it stood a barn that looked equally sturdy, and beyond that, a series of outbuildings, bunkhouse, smokehouse, chicken coop, workshop. "It's not fancy," Jonah said, and she heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "But it's sound. Roof don't leak. Walls keep the wind out. I added the second story 3 years back, thinking—" He stopped himself. "Well, thinking ahead, I suppose." Thinking about having a wife someday, Lila understood, planning for a future that was now beginning. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. Before Lila could climb down, he'd come around and lifted her by the waist, setting her on the ground as easily as if she weighed nothing. The casual display of strength should have frightened her, but his touch remained careful, conscious of his power. "Welcome home," he said, and there was something in his voice, not quite vulnerability, but close, like this moment mattered to him. Lila looked at the house, at the land stretching out in every direction, at the mountains going purple with twilight. She thought about the cramped boarding house room in Philadelphia, the textile mill with its endless roar and lint-filled air, the terror of debt collectors and her sister's frightened letters. This was different. This was a gamble, certainly, but it was also possibility. "Thank you," she said simply. Jonah nodded and grabbed her trunk like it weighed nothing, heading for the porch. "I'll show you around inside." "Cook." That's what we call him, though his real name's Josiah. He left supper on the stove. "Nothing fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs." The interior of the house was clean and surprisingly well appointed. The main room was large with a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Furniture was simple but well made. A long table, several chairs that looked sturdy enough to hold Jonah's weight, a settee near the fireplace. Windows let in the fading light, and Lila could see curtains, plain but serviceable, framing the view of the prairie. "Kitchen's through there," Jonah pointed. "Parlor, though I don't use it much. My office where I keep the accounts. And upstairs—" He hefted her trunk. "Bedrooms." The plural didn't escape her notice. He climbed the stairs and Lila followed, her hand on the smooth banister. The upper floor had 4 doors. Jonah pushed open the first. "This is my room," he said simply. "Has been for years." She glimpsed a large bed. It would have to be large to fit him, and simple furnishings. Everything tidy, almost austere. He moved to the next door. "And this is yours. I figured, given our agreement, you'd want your own space until—" He trailed off, awkward again. "Well, until whatever happens, happens." The room he showed her was smaller but charming, with a window that looked east toward the rising sun. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser and wardrobe, a small desk with a kerosene lamp, fresh curtains that matched the ones downstairs. "I didn't know what a woman would want," Jonah admitted, setting her trunk down carefully. "So I mostly just tried to make it clean and comfortable. If you want to change things—" "It's perfect," Lila interrupted, and meant it. The room was hers, her own space, just as the contract stipulated. She felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. "Thank you for respecting that part of our agreement." "I gave my word," Jonah said simply. "I keep my word." He backed toward the door. "I'll let you get settled. Supper whenever you're ready. No rush. And Lila." She turned to look at him, this giant of a man who'd agreed to terms no other man of his status would have considered. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I think this might actually work." Then he was gone, his heavy tread descending the stairs, leaving Lila alone in her new room, in her new house, on her new husband's ranch in this vast, empty territory that was now somehow home. She sat on the bed. It was comfortable, the mattress recently restuffed, and pulled the contract from her bodice. The paper was warm from being pressed against her skin. She unfolded it and read through the terms again, reassuring herself that this was real, that she'd actually done it. Through the window, the last light was fading from the sky. Stars were beginning to appear, more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia's gaslit streets. The prairie stretched out dark and endless, and somewhere in that darkness, cattle lowed and nightbirds called, and the future waited, unknowable, but no longer quite so terrifying. Lila folded the contract carefully and placed it in the desk drawer. Then she stood, smoothed her traveling dress, and headed downstairs to have supper with her husband. Whatever came next, they would face it as partners. She was counting on it. The kitchen smelled of beef stew and fresh bread, simple fare that reminded Lila she hadn't eaten since morning. Her stomach growled audibly as she descended the stairs, and she pressed a hand against it, embarrassed even though no one was there to hear. Jonah stood at the cast-iron stove, ladling stew into 2 bowls with surprising domestic competence. He'd removed his borrowed coat and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. Without the formal wedding attire, he looked more natural, more himself, a working rancher in his own domain. "Sit," he said without turning around, somehow knowing she'd entered. "Coffee's hot if you want it." Lila settled into one of the chairs at the long table, choosing a seat that gave her a view of both the kitchen and the front windows. Old habits from the boarding house, where keeping an eye on exits had been a survival skill. The chair was solid beneath her, hand-hewn from local timber, and she found herself running her fingers along the smooth armrest. Jonah brought the bowls to the table, then returned with a plate of bread and the coffee pot. He poured for both of them, his large hands managing the delicate task with unexpected grace. When he finally sat across from her, the chair creaked but held. "Cook's been with me 8 years, Jonah said, pushing the bread plate toward her. Best trail cook in 3 territories before he got too old for the circuit. Now he keeps the hands fed and the kitchen running. You'll meet him tomorrow. He bunks with the men during the week, only comes up to the main house for supplies and the occasional Sunday dinner." Lila took a piece of bread, tore it carefully, and dipped it in the stew. The first bite was heaven, rich beef, potatoes, carrots, all seasoned with herbs she couldn't quite identify. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the crackle of wood settling in the stove. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but it was weighted with awareness. They were alone now, truly alone, without the buffer of witnesses or the structure of ceremony. Just 2 strangers bound by vows and a negotiated contract, trying to figure out what came next. "You handled yourself well today," Jonah said finally, soaking up gravy with his bread. "At the church. Most women would have folded when I asked that question." "Most women haven't spent 3 years working in a textile mill surrounded by men who thought they had the right to say anything," Lila replied. "You learn to hold your ground or you get crushed." His pale eyes sharpened with interest. "That why you left Philadelphia? Men giving you trouble?" "Part of it." She wasn't ready to talk about Carmichael's foreman, about the way he'd cornered her in the supply room, about the choice between his bed and her job. Some stories needed more trust before they could be told. The mill was no kind of life. 14 hours a day breathing lint, wages that barely covered a room and 2 meals. No future in it. "And you thought Montana would be better?" "I thought Montana would be different," Lila corrected. "Better's relative. At least here I've got terms." Jonah smiled slightly at that. "Your contract, you really wrote all that yourself?" "Every word. Spent 3 nights working on it, getting the language right. I worked in the mill office sometimes, filing papers, so I saw how legal documents were structured." She met his eyes. "I meant what I said. I won't be property. And I meant what I said. I don't want property. Want a partner." He finished his stew and pushed the bowl away. "Though I'll admit, having a wife who negotiates like a lawyer wasn't quite what I pictured when I placed that advertisement." "What did you picture?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Someone practical, capable, Someone who wouldn't expect romance or poetry, just honest work and fair dealing. He shrugged. Someone who'd look at this. He gestured at the house, the land beyond the windows, and see it as opportunity instead of exile. Is that what other women saw? Exile? The two I courted before, yes. His expression turned rueful. Sarah Jenkins lasted 3 months before she went back east, said the isolation drove her mad, that she'd rather be poor in civilization than comfortable in wilderness. And Mary Webb, she took one look at me up close and decided she'd rather take her chances as a spinster. Lila heard the old hurt beneath the matter-of-fact tone. Because of your size? Because I scared her. Not intentionally. I never threatened her, never even raised my voice. But she looked at me like I was something that might eat her. He met Lila's eyes. You don't look at me that way. Should I? Most people do at first. Takes them time to get past it. He poured more coffee for them both. You either got more courage than sense, or you've seen enough of the world to know that size isn't the only measure of a man's danger. The latter, Lila said. I've known small men who are vicious, and I've known large men who are gentle. You judge by actions, not appearance, or you end up surprised when the wrong person hurts you. Something shifted in Jonah's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. Someone hurt you. Back east. It wasn't a question. Lila took a slow sip of coffee, using the time to decide how much to reveal. My father hurt us by drinking away everything we had and leaving us with his debts. The mill foreman hurt me by thinking my desperation meant I was available. The debt collectors hurt my sister by holding her responsible for another person's choices. She set down her cup. So, yes, I've been hurt. That's why I needed terms, why I needed to know I'd have some control over my own life. Jonah absorbed this, his weathered face unreadable. Then he stood, walked to a cabinet, and returned with a small wooden box. He set it on the table between them and opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of bills, more money than Lila had ever seen in one place. $500, Jonah said. I'm putting this in your keeping. Consider it your emergency fund. If things go wrong between us, if you need to leave, if your sister needs help, whatever, it's yours. No questions, no accounting. I just want you to know you're not trapped here. Lila stared at the money, her throat tight. Why would you do that? Because trust works both ways. You trusted me enough to come here, to marry me, to give this arrangement a chance. Least I can do is trust you with the means to leave if you need to. He pushed the box closer. Besides, you got a contract that says you get an allowance and your business money stays yours. This is just insurance, so you never feel like you're backed into a corner. Her eyes burned with sudden tears, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry on her wedding night, would not show that kind of vulnerability. But the gesture touched something deep, some place that had been braced for cruelty and found kindness instead. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. We haven't navigated the hard parts. He closed the box and stood. Come on. Need to show you something before it gets full dark. Lila followed him out onto the porch. The night had settled in completely now, and the stars were overwhelming, thousands of them, maybe millions, splashed across the sky in unfamiliar patterns. The Milky Way was a river of light cutting across the darkness. In Philadelphia, you were lucky to see a dozen stars through the coal smoke and gas lamps. Here, the universe opened up above her like a revelation. That's the North Star, Jonah said, pointing. That's your fixed point. Everything else moves around it, but it stays constant. You can navigate by it, find your way home if you're ever lost. He spent the next 10 minutes teaching her the basics, how to find north, how to gauge distance by the horizon, how to read the weather in the clouds gathering around the mountain peaks. It was practical information, survival knowledge, but Lila sensed something else in the teaching. He was giving her tools, ways to be less dependent, more capable in this foreign landscape. The ranch employs 12 men year-round, Jonah continued, leaning against the porch rail. More during roundup and branding. They're decent sorts, mostly. Few of them are rough, been in trouble in their pasts, but they work hard and respect the rules. First rule is, you're the boss's wife, which means you're the boss when I'm not here. They give you trouble. You tell me. I can handle trouble. I'm sure you can, but there's handling it, and there's knowing you got backup. He glanced at her. Martha Brennan, the woman who witnessed the contract. She runs her ranch with an iron fist and makes good money doing it. She'd be a good person for you to know. Most of the town women will judge you for what you did today, negotiating terms like that. But Martha'll respect it. Because she understands what it's like to be a woman in a man's world? Because she is a woman in a man's world and makes no apologies for it. Her husband died 15 years back, and everyone expected her to sell out and move back east. Instead, she learned ranching, hired good men, and built that place into one of the most profitable operations in the territory. He smiled slightly. She and I have an understanding. We help each other during emergencies, share resources when it makes sense. She's good people. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, and Lila jumped despite herself. The sound was eerie, lonely, nothing like the familiar night sounds of the city. You'll get used to it, Jonah said. Coyotes, wolves sometimes, owls hunting. The land talks at night, just different than the city. It's so empty, Lila whispered. I can't see another light anywhere. Nearest neighbor besides Martha is 8 miles south. Town's 12 miles back the way we came. In winter, when the snows come, we might not see another soul for weeks at a time. He looked at her carefully. That bother you? It should terrify her. It did terrify her. But Lila thought about the crowded boarding house, the mill floor packed with workers, the streets teeming with humanity and noise and no privacy, no space to breathe. This emptiness was different, but perhaps not worse. I'll adapt, she said, because she would. She had no choice. I believe you will. Jonah pushed away from the rail. I'll show you the barn tomorrow, introduce you to the horses. You ride? No. You'll learn. Can't get around out here without it. He headed for the door. I usually rise around 4:30, see to the morning chores before the hands get started. You don't need to wake that early. Sleep as late as you want while you're settling in. I'm used to early mornings. The mill started at 6. Still, give yourself time to adjust. It's been a long day, and you've come a long way. He paused in the doorway. Your room's got a lock on the inside. Use it if it makes you feel safer. Then he was inside, leaving Lila alone on the porch with the stars and the darkness and the strange, wild sounds of this new world. She stayed there for a long time, letting the night air cool her face, breathing in sage and pine and the smell of the prairie. In the distance, the mountains were darker shapes against the dark sky. Everything was so vast, so open, so different from anything she'd ever known. Inside, she could hear Jonah moving around, the creak of floorboards, the sound of water being poured, a door closing softly upstairs. He was giving her space, time, respecting the boundaries they'd negotiated. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt lonely. Lila went inside, locked the front door, and climbed the stairs to her room. True to Jonah's word, there was a lock on the inside. She turned it, hearing the bolt slide home, then stood in the middle of the small room feeling suddenly, overwhelmingly exhausted. Her trunk sat against the wall. She opened it, pulled out her nightgown, plain cotton, mended in places, and changed quickly. The mirror above the dresser showed her a pale face, shadows under her eyes, hair escaping its pins. She looked like what she was, a woman at the end of a very long day, in a strange place, married to a stranger. She unpinned her hair, brushed it out, and braided it loosely. Then she blew out the lamp and climbed into bed. The mattress was comfortable, the quilt soft. Through the window, stars blazed. Somewhere in the house, Jonah moved around in his own room, and she was hyper-aware of his presence, the weight of him, the reality of him, just one wall away. Sleep should have come quickly, but her mind raced. She thought about Rosie, alone in Philadelphia, waiting for word. Tomorrow she'd write, send money, begin the process of bringing her sister west. She thought about the contract tucked safely in her drawer, legal and binding. She thought about the $500 Jonah had given her without hesitation, trust translated into currency. She thought about this question he'd asked in the church. Can the little one endure it? She still didn't know the complete answer, but she'd made it through the first day, negotiated her own terms, and claimed a space in this new world. That was something. That was enough for now. Lila closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. She woke to roosters crowing and pale gray light seeping through the curtains. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was wrong, the sounds were wrong, everything was wrong. Then memory returned in a rush. Montana. The ranch. Her wedding day had been yesterday. Her wedding night had been spent alone in a locked room, unmolested. That realization brought a complicated mix of relief and something else she couldn't quite name. Lila rose, washed her face in the basin on the dresser, and dressed in her plainest work dress, brown calico that had seen better days but was sturdy and practical. She brushed and pinned her hair, then unlocked the door and ventured out. The house was quiet. Jonah's door stood open, his room empty. The bed was made with military precision, and the space was tidy. He'd been up for hours already, she realized, glancing at the small clock on the hall table. 6:30. At the mill, she'd have been working for half an hour by now. Downstairs, she found evidence of his morning, a coffee cup washed and drying by the sink, the stove stoked and keeping the kitchen warm, a covered plate with biscuits and bacon left for her. A note in that cramped handwriting. Barn if you need me. Take your time. J. Lila ate standing up, looking out the kitchen window at the sprawl of the ranch. In daylight, she could see more, the barn and outbuildings, the corrals with horses, the vast sweep of grassland rolling away to the mountains. Men were moving around out there, small figures at this distance, going about the business of ranching. She finished eating, washed her dishes, and ventured outside. The sun was already warm, promising heat by afternoon. Lila made her way toward the barn, following a well-worn path through the dirt yard. Chickens scattered from her feet, clucking indignantly. A dog, a lean cattle dog with intelligent eyes, appeared from somewhere and fell into step beside her, escorting her without aggression. The barn was enormous, built to house equipment, hay, and animals through brutal winters. It smelled of horses and leather and hay, not unpleasant once you adjusted to it. Lila stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. Voices echoed from deeper in the structure. She followed them, her footsteps quiet on the packed earth floor. Telling you, boss, she won't last a month. A man's voice, rough and amused. City girl like that? She took one look at this place and probably cried herself to sleep. Mind your mouth, Reese. That was Jonah, his tone carrying warning. Whatever you think, you keep it to yourself. She's my wife, and you'll show respect. Sure, boss, whatever you say. But we all saw what happened at the church. Girls got ideas above her station, negotiating like she's got a choice. Women like that need to be what? Lila stepped around the corner, her voice cutting through the conversation. Please do finish that sentence. I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts on what women like me need. 3 men spun toward her. Jonah stood near a stall holding a curry comb. Beside him was an older man with a weathered face and gray shot through his hair. Cook, she assumed. And leaning against a support post was a younger man, maybe 30, with dark hair and a cocky grin that faltered when he saw her. Mrs. Mercer, Jonah said, and there was something in his voice, approval mixed with wariness. Wasn't expecting you out here yet. Clearly, she looked at the younger man. You must be Reese. I'm Lila, and since we're apparently discussing me, I thought I should participate in the conversation. Reese had the grace to look embarrassed, but he covered it with bravado. Didn't mean no offense, ma'am, just making observations. Observations, Lila repeated. She moved closer, forcing herself not to be intimidated by the fact that all 3 men towered over her. Let me offer some of my own. You're wearing clothes that need mending, your hat's got a hole in it, and you smell like you haven't bathed in a week. So perhaps before you judge whether I'll last out here, you should consider whether I might judge whether you're worth the wages my husband pays you. Cook snorted, quickly covering it with a cough. Jonah's expression remained neutral, but his eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. Reese's face darkened. Now, listen here. No, you listen. Lila cut him off, her voice sharp. I don't care what you think of me. I don't care if you approve of how I married or what terms I negotiated. What I do care about is being disrespected in my own barn on my own ranch. You want to gossip about me? Do it on your own time and away from this property. Clear? The lady's got a point, Cook said mildly, stepping forward. I'm Josiah Crow, ma'am, though everyone calls me Cook. And I apologize for young Reese here. He's got more mouth than sense sometimes. Most men do, Lila said, and was rewarded with a bark of laughter from Cook. Jonah set down the curry comb and moved closer to Lila, his presence solid and supportive. "Reese, you got chores. See to them." Reese looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Jonah's stance stopped him. He touched his hat, a gesture more mocking than respectful, and stalked off, his boots loud on the barn floor. "That one's trouble," Cook observed once he was gone. "Good with horses, terrible with people, especially women." "Then perhaps he should work with horses and stay away from people," Lila suggested. Cook grinned. "I like her, boss. She's got spine." "That she does," Jonah agreed. He looked at Lila with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You didn't have to come out here and confront him." "Yes, I did. If I let the first challenge pass, there'd be 10 more. She remembered the mill, how the women who kept their heads down got walked over, while those who stood their ground, carefully, strategically, earned a measure of respect. Better to establish expectations early. "Smart," Cook said. "You've been around men like Reese before." "Unfortunately." Lila turned to Jonah. "Your note said I should take my time, but I'd rather make myself useful. What needs doing?" Jonah exchanged a glance with Cook, then looked back at her. "You sure? You just got here yesterday." "I'm sure." "Useful. What needs doing?" Jonah exchanged a glance with Cook, then looked back at her. "You sure? You just got here yesterday." "I'm sure." "I didn't come all this way to be decorative. Put me to work." For the next 3 hours, Jonah and Cook showed her around the ranch. She learned which buildings held what, where supplies were kept, how water was hauled from the creek. She met the horses, massive creatures that made her nervous but fascinated her too. Jonah's mount was a gray gelding named Thunder who stood nearly 18 hands and looked capable of carrying his rider and half the barn besides. "This is Poppy," Jonah said, leading her to a smaller stall where a roan mare watched them with gentle eyes. "She's old, steady, won't spook easy. Good horse for learning." Lila reached out tentatively and touched the mare's soft nose. Poppy snuffled against her palm, warm breath tickling her skin. "She likes you," Cook observed. "That's a good sign. Horses know things about people." "What do they know about me?" Lila asked. "That you're scared but trying not to show it. That you're determined. That you mean what you say." Cook shrugged. "Horses appreciate honesty. They don't care about your size or your past or whether you negotiated marriage terms. They just care if you're genuine." "Then we'll get along fine," Lila said, continuing to stroke Poppy's nose. By mid-morning, she'd been introduced to 6 more ranch hands, most polite if reserved, a few openly curious, one clearly taking his cues from Reese and staying coldly distant. She learned their names, their roles, and began constructing a mental map of how the ranch operated. The scale of it amazed her. 12 men to manage 4,000 acres and over 1,000 head of cattle. During Roundup, Jonah explained, they'd hire 20 more temporarily. The work was endless. Fences to mend, cattle to move between pastures, predators to watch for, equipment to maintain. In winter, they'd fight to keep the animals fed and alive through storms that could last days. "How do you keep track of it all?" she asked as they walked back toward the house. "Practice. Lists. Good men who know their jobs." Jonah adjusted his hat against the climbing sun. "And accepting that some things will go wrong no matter what you do. Cattle die, fences break, horses go lame. You plan for it, budget for it, and deal with it when it happens." "Sounds like life in general." "It is life in general, just more spread out and with bigger animals." They reached the house, and Cook split off toward the bunkhouse with a wave. Jonah led Lila inside, where the temperature was blessedly cooler. "You hungry?" he asked. "I could make lunch." "You cook?" "Enough to keep from starving. Nothing fancy." He moved toward the kitchen. "Though I should warn you, if you're expecting a wife to do all the cooking, you'll be disappointed. I hired Cook for a reason." "I can cook basic things," Lila said, following him, "but I'm no expert. At the boarding house, we mostly ate whatever Mrs. Fletcher made, and it was all terrible." Jonah pulled out bread, cheese, and some cold beef from the previous night. They assembled sandwiches in companionable silence and ate standing at the counter, both too restless to sit. "You did good this morning," Jonah said eventually, "handling Reese like that." "He needed handling." Most women would have told me privately, let me deal with it. Most women didn't negotiate marriage contracts. Lila met his eyes. If I'm going to be a partner in this ranch, I need to be able to address problems directly. Otherwise, I'm just a figurehead. You're not wrong. He finished his sandwich and brushed crumbs from his hands. But be careful with Reese. He's got a mean streak, especially toward women. He say anything inappropriate directly to you, I want to know. I know you can handle yourself, Jonah interrupted, his voice firm. But there's handling and there's being safe. Out here, isolation works both ways. You're strong, but you're also small, and you're alone most days while the men work. I need to know if there's threats. Lila absorbed this, recognizing the genuine concern beneath his words. All right, I'll tell you if there's problems. Good. He moved toward the door. I got to check on the south fence this afternoon. Creek flooded last week and might have taken out some posts. You want to come along, or you need more time to settle? She should say no. Should take the afternoon to write to Rosie, to unpack properly, to rest. But the thought of sitting alone in the house while life happened outside felt suffocating. I'll come, she said. Jonah's expression flickered with something that might have been pleased. Get your hat then. Sun's brutal this time of day. 20 minutes later, Lila found herself on horseback for the first time in her life. Jonah had saddled Poppy while explaining each step, then helped Lila mount with patient instruction. Now she sat in the saddle, gripping the reins too tightly, while Poppy stood steady beneath her. Relax, Jonah said from atop Thunder. Horse can feel your tension, makes her nervous. I am nervous. This animal is huge. She's small for a horse, and she's got more sense than most people. Just trust her. He clicked his tongue, and Thunder started forward. Poppy, thankfully, followed without Lila having to do anything. They rode south across open grassland, Jonah keeping Thunder to a walk so Poppy could easily keep pace. The sun beat down, and Lila was grateful for the wide-brimmed hat Jonah had found for her. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by occasional stands of trees marking water sources and the ever-present mountains on the horizon. You ever miss the city? Jonah asked after a while. Not yet. Ask me in winter when I'm snowbound for weeks. Fair enough, he pointed ahead. See that line of green? That's the creek. Runs year-round, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. Most precious thing on this ranch besides the cattle. They reached the creek, and Jonah dismounted smoothly. He helped Lila down, again that careful strength, making sure she landed safely, and they walked along the bank. Water rushed cold and clear over smooth stones, and willows trailed their branches in the current. There, Jonah said, pointing. See where the bank collapsed? Took out 3 fence posts. Lucky it wasn't more. He spent the next hour assessing the damage and making notes in a small book he pulled from his saddlebag. Lila helped where she could, holding tools or marking measurements, learning by watching. The work was hot, physical, methodical. Jonah moved with the easy competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. We'll send a crew out tomorrow to fix it proper, he said finally, wiping sweat from his forehead. For now, just needed to know the extent. They remounted and rode back toward the ranch, taking a different route that showed Lila more of the property. Cattle grazed in small groups, raising their heads to watch the riders pass. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals. The land rolled on forever, beautiful and harsh and utterly indifferent to human concerns. What do you think? Jonah asked as the ranch buildings came back into view. I think it's overwhelming, Lila answered honestly. I think I have no idea what I'm doing, but I also think... She paused, searching for words. I think there's possibility here, room to become something more than what I was. That's why most people come west, escape the past, build something new. He glanced at her. Some succeed, some don't. Difference is usually in how hard they're willing to work and how well they face reality. Then I'll succeed, Lila said with more confidence than she felt. Because I'm willing to work, and I've never been good at fooling myself. No, Jonah agreed, something like respect in his voice. I don't imagine you have. They reached the barn, and Jonah taught Lila how to unsaddle Poppy, how to brush her down and check her hooves. By the time they finished, Lila's arms ached and sweat plastered her dress to her back. But there was satisfaction in the physical work, in learning something useful. "You did good today," Jonah said as they walked toward the house. "Better than good. Most city women would have been exhausted after an hour. You kept going." "I worked 14-hour days at the mill," Lila reminded him. "This is hard, but it's not harder, just different." Cook had left supper on the stove again, roasted chicken and vegetables this time. They ate together at the long table, both too tired for much conversation. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. After supper, Jonah excused himself to his office to work on accounts. Lila cleaned up the kitchen, a task that felt comfortingly normal, then climbed the stairs to her room. She lit the lamp, pulled out writing paper from her trunk, and began a letter to Rosie. "Dearest Rosie, I am married. I am in Montana. I am safe. These are the 3 things you need to know first, before anything else. The man I married is named Jonah Mercer. He is enormous, intimidating, and surprisingly honorable. We have an agreement, a contract I negotiated before the wedding. Terms that protect me, protect you, give me rights and resources. It's not romantic, but it's more than most women get. The ranch is vast and beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. I am learning to ride horses, learning the work, learning how to survive in this place. It's so different from Philadelphia I can barely describe it. The sky here is bigger than anything I've ever seen. I am sending money with this letter, enough to cover 3 months of safe lodging. Stay with Reverend Marcus if he'll still have you, or find a decent boarding house. Avoid Mrs. Fletcher and anyone connected to Carmichael. I will arrange your travel west as soon as I can, perhaps by autumn, definitely before winter. Be brave, little sister. I have not forgotten you. I will never forget you. This gamble I took was for both of us, and I will make it work. All my love, Lila." She folded the letter, addressed an envelope, and set it aside to mail tomorrow. Then she changed into her nightgown, washed her face, and sat on the bed, too keyed up to sleep despite her exhaustion. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Lila?" Jonah's voice quiet. "You decent?" "Yes." He opened the door but stayed in the hallway, respecting the boundary. "Just wanted to check on you, make sure you got everything you need." "I'm fine. Thank you." "Good." He hesitated. "You did real well today, with Reese, with the riding, with all of it. I know this isn't easy for you." "It's not easy for you either," Lila observed, "having a wife suddenly changing your routines." "True enough." He smiled slightly. "But I think we'll figure it out. We're both stubborn enough." "That we are." Another pause, waited with things unsaid. Then Jonah nodded. "Sleep well, Lila Hart Mercer. Tomorrow, I'll teach you to shoot." "Shoot what?" "Whatever needs shooting. Rattlesnakes, coyotes, threats." His expression turned serious. "You're going to be alone out here sometimes. I need to know you can protect yourself." It should have frightened her, the implication of danger, the necessity of violence. Instead, it felt like empowerment, another tool, another way to be less helpless. "All right," she agreed. "I'll learn." "Good night, then." "Good night." He closed the door softly, and Lila heard his footsteps retreat to his own room. She blew out the lamp and lay in darkness, listening to the house settle around her. 2 nights in this new life. 2 nights of sleeping alone, unmolested, given space and respect. She thought about the question Jonah had asked in the church. Can the little one endure it? The answer was still forming, still being written day by day. But lying here in this comfortable bed in her own room, with a contract in her drawer and possibilities stretching ahead, Lila thought maybe, just maybe, the answer was yes. She could endure it. More than that, she could thrive. Time would tell if her confidence was justified or foolish. But for tonight, exhausted and aching and somehow content, she chose to believe in possibility. Tomorrow she'd learn to shoot. Tomorrow she'd write more letters, explore more of the ranch, continue building her place in this world. Tomorrow was coming whether she was ready or not. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreaming of vast skies and endless land and a future she was only beginning to imagine. The gunshot cracked across the prairie like thunder, and the tin can Lila had been aiming at remained stubbornly upright on the fence post 20 yards away. She lowered the revolver, her arm aching from the weapon's weight and recoil, and tried not to let her frustration show. "You're anticipating," Jonah said from beside her, his voice patient despite this being her 15th miss in a row. "Flinching right before you pull the trigger because you expect the kick. Gun feels it, barrel moves, shot goes wide." "I'm not flinching," Lila argued, though she knew he was right. The revolver, a Colt .38 that Jonah swore was lighter than his own, felt like holding concentrated violence. Every shot jarred her arm, made her ears ring despite the cotton wadding Jonah had insisted she stuff in them. "Yes, you are. Here." He moved behind her, his bulk blocking the morning sun. His arms came around her, steadying her stance without crowding, his hands guiding hers on the weapon. "Feet shoulder width. Left foot slightly forward if you're right-handed. Bend your knees just a touch. Absorbs the recoil better." Lila adjusted her position, hyper-aware of his closeness. This was the most physical contact they'd had since the wedding 4 days ago, and even through her nervousness about the gun, she registered the warmth of him, the solid presence, the way his voice rumbled through his chest against her back. "Now sight down the barrel, line up the notch with the front post. Target should sit right on top of that post." His hand covered hers on the grip, steadying it. "Breathe in, let half out, right there, hold it, and squeeze, don't pull, smooth and steady." The gun fired. The can jumped and spun off the fence post, clattering to the ground. "There!" Jonah stepped back, and Lila could hear the grin in his voice. "See? You can do it when you're not thinking yourself into knots." "You did most of that," Lila protested, but she couldn't suppress her own smile. Finally, after an hour of practice, she'd hit something. "I steadied you. You made the shot." He reloaded the revolver with practiced efficiency, his scarred fingers moving with surprising delicacy. "Again. This time without my help." They'd been at this since dawn, after morning chores and a quick breakfast. Jonah had set up targets in a cleared area behind the barn, tin cans, bottles, eventually a scarecrow figure stuffed with straw that he'd positioned at various distances. The ranch hands had watched with interest for the first 20 minutes, then drifted back to work when it became clear this was serious instruction, not entertainment. Except Reese. He lingered near the barn, ostensibly mending tack but obviously watching. Lila could feel his eyes on her, his judgment, his satisfaction every time she missed. It made her want to prove herself even more, which only increased her tension and made her shoot worse. "Ignore him," Jonah said quietly, following her gaze. "He's trying to get in your head. Don't let him." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one he's sneering at." "I've had plenty of people sneer at me over the years. You know what I learned?" Jonah handed her the reloaded revolver. "Their opinion means exactly nothing unless you give it power. Reese thinks you're going to fail. Prove him wrong. Best revenge there is." Lila took a breath, centered herself, and raised the weapon. This time she focused on mechanics rather than outcome. Feet positioned, knees soft, sight picture clear. Breathe in, half out, hold, squeeze. The can jumped. Not dead center, but hit nonetheless. "Better!" Jonah's approval was genuine. Again. By the time the sun climbed to mid-morning, Lila had hit 6 out of 10 targets. Her arm trembled with fatigue, her ears rang despite the cotton, and she was fairly certain she'd have a bruise on her shoulder from the recoil. But she could shoot. Not well, not consistently, but adequately. Enough to defend herself if needed. "That'll do for today," Jonah said, taking the revolver and carefully unloading it. "You did good. Tomorrow we'll work on drawing faster, reloading under pressure. For now, you've earned a break." They walked back toward the house, and Lila flexed her aching fingers. "How long before I'm actually proficient?" "Depends how much you practice. Couple months of regular shooting, you'll be decent. Year or two, you could be better than half the men on this ranch." He glanced at her. "Martha Brennan can outshoot most men in the territory. She practices every Sunday, rain or shine. Says a woman who can't defend herself is a woman asking for trouble. I'd like to meet her properly. At the wedding, there wasn't time. I'll ride over with you this week, introduce you formal-like. She's usually got coffee on, and she knows everything happening within 50 miles. Good person to have as friend." They reached the porch, and Jonah set the revolver carefully on a shelf inside the door. "Speaking of which, there's a town social Saturday week, dance and potluck at the community hall. We should go." Lila looked at him in surprise. You want to go to a social? Not particularly. Hate those things. Too many people, too much gossip, and I break things trying to dance in spaces that small. He shrugged. But you're new here, and people need to see you as part of the community. Plus, might be good for you to meet some of the women besides Martha. Build connections. The same women who judged me for negotiating marriage terms? Some will judge you, some will respect you. Won't know which is which until you talk to them. His expression turned wry. And I'll be there, looking intimidating in the corner, tends to discourage people from being too bold with their opinions. Despite herself, Lila smiled. My protector. Your husband comes with the territory. He headed inside, calling back, I've got accounts to review. You need anything? I'll be in the office. Lila stayed on the porch, looking out at the ranch. In just 4 days, it had begun to feel less foreign, more familiar. She knew which building held what, recognized most of the horses in the corral, could identify several landmarks on the horizon. Not home yet, but no longer completely alien. A rider appeared in the distance, coming from the north at an easy lope. As they drew closer, Lila recognized Martha Brennan's tall figure and distinctive gray Appaloosa. She watched Martha approach, then dismount with the fluid ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime on horseback. Morning, Martha called, looping her reins over the porch rail. Saw you shooting from my north pasture. Thought I'd ride over, see how you're settling. Good timing. Jonah just said he wanted to bring me to visit you. Saved him the trip then. Martha climbed the porch steps and settled into one of the chairs without waiting for invitation, completely at ease. Up close, she was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her face was weathered by sun and wind into deep lines that somehow made her more distinguished rather than old. She wore men's trousers and a work shirt and carried herself with absolute confidence. So, Martha said, studying Lila with unnerving directness. How's married life treating you? It's an adjustment. I bet. Marrying a man you'd never met, moving to the middle of nowhere, negotiating terms in front of half the territory. Martha's smile was sharp. Either you're the bravest woman I've met, or the most desperate. I'm thinking maybe both. There was no judgment in the observation, just assessment. Lila decided to be honest. Both. My sister and I were in trouble back east. This was the best option available. And now? Now I'm learning to shoot, ride, and run a ranch. Jonah's keeping his word on the contract. The work is hard, but not impossible. She met Martha's eyes. I think I can make this work. Of course you can. Question is whether you want to. Martha leaned back, her chair creaking. See, survival's one thing. Actually building a life worth living, that's something else. I've known Jonah Mercer 15 years. He's a good man, fair dealer, harder worker than any 3 men combined. But he's also stubborn, hot-tempered when pushed, and so used to being alone he sometimes forgets other people exist. You're telling me this why? Because you negotiated a partnership, and partnerships require both people to show up. Jonah's been on his own so long, he might need reminding sometimes that he's got a partner now. Martha pulled a flask from her jacket and took a sip, then offered it to Lila. Also because I like you. Takes guts to do what you did at that church. Most women would have just accepted whatever terms were offered and hoped for the best. Lila accepted the flask and took a careful sip. Whiskey, smooth and expensive. She handed it back. I couldn't afford to hope. Hope doesn't pay debts or protect my sister. No, it doesn't. Practical woman. Good. Martha tucked the flask away. I'm having a quilting circle Tuesday afternoon, usually 6 or 7 women, mostly ranch wives and a few from town. You should come. I'm not much of a quilter. Neither am I. Hate sewing, can't see close up anymore anyway. But it's where we talk, share information, help each other. You need to know who's friendly, who's not, what problems are brewing. Martha stood, stretching. Plus, Mrs. Henderson from the bank will be there, and she's the biggest gossip in 3 counties. Let her meet you proper-like, form her own opinion instead of working off rumors. The same Mrs. Henderson who said my contract was inappropriate. The very same. But Eleanor Henderson is also practical under all that propriety. She runs that bank more than her husband does, even if his name's on the door. She'll respect capability even if she disapproves of your methods. Martha headed for the steps. Tuesday, 2 o'clock, my place. Bring nothing but yourself and a willingness to listen more than you talk. First rule of surviving in a small community. Thank you, Lila said, meaning it. For the invitation and for... She gestured vaguely. All of this. You didn't have to come check on me. Yes, I did. We women out here have to look after each other. Men have their networks, their codes. We need ours. Martha swung into her saddle with enviable grace. Besides, like I said, I like you. Don't get many women with backbone moving into the territory. Most of them are too soft for this life, break within a year. You strike me as different. I can't afford to break. No, Martha agreed, gathering her reins. I don't suppose you can. That's what'll save you? Necessity. It's a powerful motivator. She wheeled her Appaloosa and cantered off, raising dust that glowed golden in the sunlight. Lila watched until she disappeared beyond a rise, then went inside to find Jonah still bent over his account books in the office. Martha came by, she said from the doorway. Invited me to a quilting circle Tuesday. Jonah looked up, his expression pleased. Good. She's taking you under her wing. That'll help with the other women. He set down his pen. What'd you think of her? She's terrifying and wonderful. I want to be her when I'm 60. That earned one of his rare, genuine laughs. Most people have that reaction. She's one of the best people I know. Tough as rawhide, smart as a whip, and loyal to her bones. You're lucky she likes you. She said partnerships require both people to show up. Lila stepped into the office, looking at the papers spread across the desk. That will need to remind you sometimes that you have a partner. Jonah absorbed this, then nodded slowly. She's not wrong. I've been running this place alone for so long, I don't always think to consult or explain. He gestured at the accounts. Case in point, I've been sitting here making decisions about which cattle to sell, when to schedule roundup, how much to budget for winter supplies. Didn't occur to me you might want input. Do you want my input? I don't know yet. You don't know ranching well enough to have informed opinions on most of this. He leaned back in his chair. But you're smart, you're learning fast, and you see things from a different angle than I do. So, yes, I think I do want your input, or at least I want you to understand what's happening so you can learn. Lila moved closer, looking at the columns of figures. Teach me then. Start with what all these numbers mean. For the next 2 hours, Jonah walked her through the ranch's finances. Income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and supplies and wages, profit margins that were thinner than she'd expected. He showed her how weather affected everything. A bad winter meant higher feed costs and lower calf survival rates. A drought meant selling cattle early before they hit optimal weight, taking a loss. Disease could wipe out a season's profits in weeks. Ranching's gambling, he said bluntly. You're betting on weather, on markets, on your cattle staying healthy, and your men staying sober. Some years you win big. Some years you just survive. Last 3 years have been good, which is why I could afford a wife and the improvements I've been making. But there's no guarantee next year won't kick us in the teeth. How do you manage the uncertainty? Save during good years. Diversify. I've got some horses I breed and sell, some hay I can sell to other ranchers if I don't need it, some investments in town businesses. Don't put all your money in one place. He tapped a column. And keep expenses low. Every dollar you don't spend is a dollar saved for emergencies. What about my allowance and bringing my sister west? Are those expenses you can afford? Jonah looked at her steadily. Yes, I wouldn't have agreed to them if I couldn't. Your $20 a month is accounted for and Rosie's travel and board are budgeted. That's not charity, Lila. It's part of our contract, which makes it as essential as paying the hands or buying winter feed. Something tight in Lila's chest loosened. She hadn't realized how worried she'd been that Jonah might resent the expense, might find ways to delay or deny what they'd agreed to. But he spoke of it as settled fact, obligation met without grudging. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me for keeping my word, that's baseline expectation. He returned his attention to the accounts. Now, look at this column here. This is what we project for calf sales in autumn. They worked until Cook rang the lunch bell, a literal bell mounted outside the bunkhouse that clanged loud enough to carry across the ranch. Jonah and Lila walked to the main house together, and she found herself matching his stride naturally now, no longer struggling to keep up with his longer legs. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings started early. Lila still couldn't manage Jonah's 4:30 rising, but she was up by 5:30, helping with breakfast and morning chores. Jonah continued teaching her to ride, and Poppy proved patient with her novice handling. By the end of the first week, Lila could saddle her own horse, mount without assistance, and manage a trot without bouncing painfully. She learned the ranch's geography by riding it, Jonah pointing out boundaries and landmarks, and the patterns of water and grass that determined where cattle grazed. She learned to identify problems, a fence post leaning wrong, a cow limping, signs of predator activity. She learned the names and personalities of the ranch hands, figuring out who was reliable, who needed supervision, and who to avoid when possible. Reese continued to be a problem. Not overtly, he was too smart to directly challenge Jonah's authority, but he made his contempt for Lila clear in small ways. Accidentally, letting gates swing closed before she could ride through. Making comments just loud enough for her to hear about city girls playing ranch. Looking through her as if she didn't exist when she gave instructions. "He's testing you," Cook said one afternoon when Lila mentioned it. They were in the kitchen, and she was learning to make bread while he worked on supper. "Wants to see if you'll run crying to Jonah or handle it yourself." "What should I do?" "Depends. You want Jonah to solve your problems, or you want to prove you can stand on your own?" Cook punched down his bread dough with practiced efficiency. "No wrong answer, mind you. Marriage means having someone to lean on. But if you want real respect from these men, not just fear of the boss's anger, you gotta show you can hold your own." How did Martha handle it when she took over her ranch? Fired 3 men the first week for insubordination. Shot a horse thief herself when the sheriff was too far away. Worked every day alongside the men until they couldn't deny she pulled her weight. Cook shaped his dough into loaves. Martha's harder than most, though. Don't have to be that extreme, just have to be consistent. Lila thought about this as she kneaded her own dough, the repetitive motion somehow soothing, consistency. She could do that. She'd survived 3 years at the mill by being consistently competent, showing up every day, never giving the foreman ammunition to use against her. Tuesday came, and Jonah rode with her to Martha's ranch for the quilting circle. The neighboring property was smaller than Jonah's, but impressively run, with everything maintained to exacting standards. Martha's house was similar in size to theirs, but decorated with more personality. Actual curtains instead of plain fabric, rugs on the floors, photographs and small treasures on shelves. 6 women were already gathered in Martha's parlor when they arrived. Jonah made his excuses and headed to the barn to talk business with Martha's foreman, leaving Lila to face the assembled company alone. "Ladies," Martha said, gesturing Lila forward, "this is Lila Mercer, Jonah's new wife. Lila, this is Eleanor Henderson, Sarah Wright, Margaret Chen, Alice Thornton, Ruth Blackwell, and you met my niece Clara at the wedding." Lila took a seat in the circle, accepting a cup of tea from Clara. The women ranged in age from perhaps 30 to 60, a mix of ranch wives and town women. Eleanor Henderson, the banker's wife, watched Lila with sharp, assessing eyes. "So," Eleanor said without preamble, "are you settling in well, Mrs. Mercer?" "I'm adjusting," Lila said carefully. "There's a lot to learn." "I imagine there is. Ranch life is quite different from Philadelphia, I understand." Eleanor's tone was pleasant, but there was calculation underneath. This was an evaluation. "Very different, but different isn't necessarily bad." "And your arrangement with Mr. Mercer, that contract you had witnessed?" Eleanor's needlework didn't falter, her hands moving with practiced precision. "Quite unorthodox." Here it was, the judgment Lila had been expecting. She met Eleanor's eyes squarely. "It seemed practical to establish clear expectations from the beginning. Prevents misunderstandings later." "Practical," Eleanor repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose there's a certain logic to it. Though it does rather remove the romance from marriage, doesn't it?" "I didn't come west for romance," Lila said. "I came for opportunity and security. The contract provides both." A small silence fell. Then Margaret Chen, a Chinese woman perhaps 10 years older than Lila, spoke up. "I think it's brilliant. My husband and I had an arranged marriage. My family in San Francisco, his here. We met twice before the wedding. If I'd thought to negotiate terms beforehand, I'd have saved myself considerable grief those first years. Exactly! Alice Thornton, a rancher's wife with sun-weathered skin and capable hands, nodded emphatically. How many women get married with completely different expectations than their husbands, and then spend years fighting over unspoken assumptions? At least Mrs. Mercer and Jonah know where they stand. It's mercenary, Eleanor insisted, but with less conviction now. Marriage should be about love and commitment, not contracts and negotiations. Marriage is a legal contract regardless, Martha interjected smoothly, her needlework as abandoned as everyone else's. The only difference is whether you negotiate the terms or accept the state's defaults. Lila just chose to negotiate. Can't fault her for using her head. The conversation shifted then, moving to safer topics. The upcoming town social, whose daughter was courting whom, the concerning drought conditions to the south. But Lila felt the shift in temperature. She'd been tested, and if not wholly accepted, at least not rejected. These women were willing to give her a chance. As the afternoon wore on, the women relaxed further. Ruth Blackwell shared a scandalous story about the new school teacher and the telegraph operator. Sarah Wright asked Lila's advice on a sewing pattern she'd ordered from New York. Margaret taught everyone a clever method for patching worn elbows that her mother had used. By the time Jonah returned to collect her, Lila felt exhausted but pleased. She'd made inroads, established herself as someone worth knowing. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was possibility. How was it? Jonah asked as they rode home in the golden afternoon light. Survivable. Eleanor Henderson grilled me about the contract, but Martha and some of the others defended the logic of it. Eleanor's bark is worse than her bite. She actually respects competence, just has to get past her need to maintain propriety first. He glanced at her. You did good. Showing up, facing them down. Not everyone would have the nerve. I didn't really have a choice. You always have a choice. You could have stayed home, avoided the whole thing, but you didn't. There was approval in his voice. You keep showing up, keep proving yourself. You'll have friends here. Real ones, not just people being polite. That evening, Lila wrote another letter to Rosie, this one more detailed about daily life. She described the ranch, the people, the vast emptiness that was becoming less frightening and more beautiful. She included more money, another month's worth of security. She was addressing the envelope when Jonah appeared in her doorway, something in his hands. Got something for you, he said, almost awkward. Made me think of you, so well, here. He held out a book, leather-bound and clearly well-made. Lila took it, opened the cover, and found herself looking at blank pages. A journal. Thought you might want to write things down, Jonah said, not quite meeting her eyes. Letters are good for your sister, but maybe you need space for your own thoughts too, things you can't say to anyone else. Lila traced the leather binding, touched by the gesture. Where did you get this? Had it in my office. Bought it years ago thinking I'd keep better records, but never used it. Seems like it should go to someone who'll actually write in it. He shifted his weight. Anyway, it's yours if you want it. I want it. Thank you, Jonah. He nodded, still awkward, then retreated to his own room. Lila sat on her bed with the journal in her lap, overwhelmed by the small kindness. He was trying, she realized, trying to be a partner, to think of her needs, to show care in the only ways he knew how. She opened the journal and wrote her first entry. Day 8 in Montana. I am learning to shoot, to ride, to navigate both the land and the people. Jonah is not what I expected. Harder in some ways, softer in others. This arrangement we have is strange and practical and somehow working. I miss Rosie desperately, but I hope, I am building something here. Something worth the risk. The days rolled forward. Lila's shooting improved, her riding became competent, her understanding of ranch operations deepened. She attended another quilting circle and a church service where people stared but no longer with quite such naked curiosity. She helped cook prepare a feast for the hands on a Saturday night, earning grudging respect from even the most skeptical men when they tasted her apple pie. The only persistent problem was Reese. His attitude toward her didn't improve. If anything, it worsened. He made sure never to cross clear lines that would give Jonah cause to fire him, but he pushed boundaries constantly. Comments about her horsemanship within earshot. Questions about whether she was playing ranch or planning to stick around. Looks that made her skin crawl. He's trying to provoke you into complaining, Cook observed one morning. Wants you to run to Jonah so he can paint you as weak, needing a man to fight your battles. I know, I'm ignoring him. That working? Not particularly, Lila admitted. He's getting bolder. Might come to a head soon then. These things usually do. Cook gave her a measuring look. You ready to handle it when it does? I'll have to be. The confrontation came on Saturday, the day before the town social. Lila was in the barn alone, checking on Poppy, when Reese appeared in the doorway. The other hands were out on the range, and Jonah was in town picking up supplies. Cook was at the bunkhouse. She was, for all practical purposes, isolated. Well now, Reese drawled, leaning against the doorframe in a way that blocked the exit. Fancy meeting you here all alone, Mrs. Mercer. Lila's hand moved instinctively to her skirt pocket, where she'd taken to carrying the small revolver Jonah had given her, but she didn't draw it yet. Is there something you need, Reese? Just wondering how long you're planning to keep up this charade. He pushed away from the doorframe, moving deeper into the barn, not threatening yet, but definitely invading her space. Playing at being a rancher's wife, thinking you can negotiate terms like you're somebody important. I am somebody important. I'm Jonah's wife and partner in this ranch. She kept her voice level, betraying none of the fear churning in her stomach. Which makes me your employer. Reese laughed, harsh and mocking. You ain't my employer. You're a city girl playing dress-up, and everyone knows it. Give it another month and you'll be on that eastbound train, crying all the way back to wherever you came from. I'm not going anywhere. We'll see about that. He moved closer, and now there was definite menace in his posture. See, I think you're trouble. I think you got ideas that are going to poison this whole operation. Men don't need their women negotiating and demanding and thinking they're equal. Ruins the natural order of things. The natural order, Lila repeated, her hand closing around the revolver grip, is that people treat each other with respect regardless of size or gender. You seem to have forgotten that. And you need to remember your place. He reached out as if to grab her arm. Lila drew the revolver, thumbed back the hammer, and pointed it steadily at his chest. Don't. Reese froze, his eyes widening. For a long moment, they stood there, her small and armed, him larger, but suddenly uncertain. You won't shoot me, he said, but there was doubt in his voice now. Won't I? Lila kept the weapon steady, remembering Jonah's lessons. You just threatened me. You're advancing on me aggressively. Any judge in the territory would call this self-defense. Boss would never forgive you for shooting one of his men. My husband, Lila corrected coldly, would never forgive you for threatening his wife. Now back up, get on your horse, and ride out. You're fired. You can't fire me. You're not. I'm partner in this ranch, which means I absolutely can fire you. Consider it done. Collect your things from the bunkhouse and be gone before Jonah gets back. Because if he finds you here after what just happened, she let the threat hang unfinished. Reese's face went purple with rage, but he apparently had enough sense to recognize genuine danger. He backed toward the door, hands raised. You'll regret this. You think you're so smart, but you just made an enemy. I already had an enemy. Now I just have one less employee. She kept the gun trained on him until he disappeared from view, then listened as his boots stomped away, followed by the sound of a horse being quickly saddled and ridden out at speed. Only then did Lila lower the weapon, her hand suddenly shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She sank onto a hay bale, the reality of what had just happened crashing over her. She'd drawn a weapon on a man, fired him, made a unilateral decision that would affect the entire ranch. Jonah was going to be furious. Or maybe he wouldn't. She'd handled a threat, made a call. That was partnership, wasn't it? She was still sitting there, trying to calm her racing heart, when Cook appeared in the barn doorway. Saw Reese ride out like the devil was chasing him, Cook said mildly. Figured something happened. You all right? He threatened me. I pulled a gun on him and fired him. The words came out flat, exhausted. Was that the right call? Cook came closer, sat on a hay bale across from her. He threatened you how? Lila recounted the confrontation, leaving nothing out. When she finished, Cook nodded slowly. Yeah, you made the right call. Reese has been cruising for a reckoning since you got here. Actually, he's been a problem for months. Jonah's been looking for cause to cut him loose." Cook's weathered face creased in approval. "You just gave him that cause and handled it yourself to boot. Boss will respect that. Or he'll be angry I made a major decision without consulting him. Can't consult someone who's not here. You made a judgment call in the moment, which is exactly what a partner's supposed to do." Cook stood, offered her a hand up. "Come on, let's get you to the house. You look like you could use some coffee and a minute to settle." They walked to the house together, and Cook made coffee while Lila sat at the kitchen table, her hand still trembling slightly. The revolver sat on the table between them, a reminder of how close things had come to violence. Jonah returned an hour later, wagon loaded with supplies. Lila met him at the door, and he took one look at her face and set down the crate he was carrying. "What happened?" She told him, the whole story spilling out. His expression darkened progressively as she spoke, particularly when she described Reese's advance. By the time she finished, his jaw was clenched so tight she could see muscles jumping. "He threatened you," Jonah said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Moved on you aggressively." "Yes, so I drew on him and fired him." "Good." The single word was clipped, final. "Damn good. I should have cut him loose weeks ago, but I didn't have solid cause. Now I do." He looked at her with something fierce in his eyes, pride mixed with anger, not at her but on her behalf. "You handled that exactly right, Lila. Exactly. You protected yourself, made the call, didn't back down. I thought you might be angry I fired one of your men without asking." "One of our men," he corrected, "and you're my partner. You see a threat, you deal with it. That's how this works." He pulled her into an unexpected hug, careful of his strength but unmistakably protective. "I'm just glad you weren't hurt. If he'd touched you—" "He didn't. I made sure of it." Jonah pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. "You did. You kept your head, used what I taught you, handled the situation. I'm proud of you." The words, simple and genuine, made Lila's eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. "Thank you for believing me." "Why wouldn't I? You've given me no reason to doubt you." He released her and turned to unload the wagon. "Reese won't be a problem anymore, and word'll spread. The boss's wife drew on a man threatening her and lived to tell about it. That'll earn respect from the right people." That evening, the other hands drifted to the house one by one, ostensibly to help unload supplies, but clearly wanting to hear the story. Cook told it with relish, embellishing only slightly, and by the time he finished, the men were looking at Lila with new eyes. "Heard Reese has been asking for trouble," one of them said. "Glad someone finally called him on it." "You really pulled iron on him?" another asked Lila directly. "I did." "And told him he was fired just like that?" "Just like that." Slow grins spread across several faces. "Ma'am," one of the older hands said, touching his hat, "you're all right. Takes stones to do what you did." The approval, rough and genuine, meant more than Lila had expected. She'd proven herself to these men, earned their respect not through Jonah's power but through her own actions. That night she wrote in her journal, "Today I pulled a gun on a man. Today I fired someone who threatened me. Today I learned I'm stronger than I knew, and more capable of violence than I'd imagined." Jonah said he was proud of me. "The ranch hands are treating me differently, like I've earned my place here. I should feel triumphant, but mostly I just feel tired. This land changes you, hardens you. I hope it doesn't harden me so much I lose who I was, but I'm beginning to think who I was wouldn't survive here. Maybe becoming someone new is the point." She closed the journal and looked out her window at the star-filled sky. Tomorrow was the town social, where everyone would hear about the confrontation. More judgment, more evaluation, more proving herself. But tonight, in this moment, Lila felt something she hadn't felt in years. Powerful, capable, like she could endure anything this territory threw at her. The question Jonah had asked at the altar echoed in her mind. Can the little one endure it? She was discovering the answer, one hard day at a time. And so far, against all odds, the answer was yes. The community hall blazed with lamplight against the gathering dusk, and music spilled out into the evening air, fiddle and banjo playing something lively and slightly off-key. Wagons and horses crowded the area around the building, and people streamed toward the entrance carrying covered dishes and children, dressed in their Sunday best and ready for the first real social gathering since summer began. Lila sat beside Jonah in their wagon, smoothing her dress for the 10th time and trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. She'd chosen her best dress, a deep green calico she'd made herself years ago, mended and pressed until it looked almost new. Her hair was pinned in her most elaborate style, and she wore the small cameo brooch that had been her mother's, one of the few things she'd kept from her old life. "You look fine," Jonah said, as if reading her thoughts. He looked uncomfortable himself in a clean shirt and his Sunday coat, his hair slicked back and his beard freshly trimmed. "Better than fine. You look pretty." The compliment, awkward but genuine, made Lila's cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself." "I clean up like a bear in a suit, but I appreciate the lie." He set the brake and climbed down, then came around to help her. His hands spanned her waist easily as he lifted her to the ground, and for a moment they stood close, his bulk blocking the lamplight and creating a small pocket of intimacy. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "No, but let's do it anyway." They walked toward the hall together, and Lila was acutely aware of the attention they drew. Conversations paused as they passed. Heads turned. People leaned together to whisper. Everyone knew about the Reese incident by now. News traveled fast in a small community, and everyone would be watching to see how Lila handled herself. Martha intercepted them at the door, resplendent in a dark blue dress that somehow made her weathered features look elegant rather than harsh. "There you are." "Lila, you look lovely. Jonah, try not to break any furniture tonight." "I make no promises," Jonah rumbled, but there was warmth in his voice. Inside, the hall was packed with people, ranchers and townfolk, families and single men from various outfits, everyone taking advantage of the rare opportunity to socialize. Long tables lined one wall, groaning under the weight of contributed food. The other wall held chairs where older folks and mothers with babies held court. The center floor was clear for dancing, and several couples were already spinning through a reel. Eleanor Henderson approached almost immediately, her husband Thomas in tow. The banker was a mild-mannered man who seemed perpetually overshadowed by his more forceful wife. "Mrs. Mercer," Eleanor said, and her tone was considerably warmer than it had been at the quilting circle. "I heard about your encounter with that dreadful Reese person. Quite brave of you." "Foolish, some might say," Lila replied carefully. "Brave and foolish often look similar until after the fact." Eleanor's sharp eyes assessed her. "But you handled yourself with admirable composure from what I hear. Thomas and I were just saying, weren't we, Thomas, that you're exactly the sort of woman this territory needs, capable and clear-headed." "High praise from Eleanor," Thomas murmured, and earned a look from his wife. "Well, it's true. Too many women come west expecting romance and adventure, then crumble when they discover it's mostly hard work and harsh weather." Eleanor smiled, and it transformed her severe features into something almost kind. "You came expecting exactly that, and you're meeting it head-on. Admirable." Lila felt something ease in her chest. Eleanor Henderson's approval might be conditional and calculating, but it was genuine. And in a community this small, having the banker's wife on your side mattered. Other people approached throughout the evening, some to offer genuine welcome, others clearly fishing for gossip, a few to make their disapproval of her contract negotiations subtly known. Lila navigated it all with as much grace as she could muster, Jonah's solid presence beside her lending confidence. "You're doing great," he murmured during a brief lull. "Better than I ever did at these things." "What do you usually do at socials?" "Stand in the corner looking intimidating until someone needs something heavy moved, then go home early." He glanced at the dance floor. "I should probably ask you to dance. That's what husbands do, right?" "Do you know how to dance?" "In theory, in practice." He gestured at his size. "I'm like a buffalo in a china shop, dangerous to everyone nearby." Despite her nervousness, Lila laughed. "Then let's skip the dancing. I'd rather not get trampled on our first social outing." Smart woman. But there was relief in his eyes. Margaret Chen appeared with her husband William, a quiet man who ran a successful freight business. They chatted pleasantly about the weather and the upcoming harvest season until Margaret leaned closer to Lila. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did with Reese. He made comments to me last year before my husband shut it down. Men like that think women are fair game for their contempt. You standing up to him, drawing on him, that sends a message. Makes it safer for all of us." I didn't think of it that way. I just reacted. Sometimes the best actions are reactions. You didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess yourself. That takes courage. Margaret squeezed her hand briefly. If you ever need anything, advice, help, just another woman to talk to, come find me. The evening progressed. Lila contributed her apple pie to the dessert table and watched with satisfaction as it disappeared within minutes. She danced once with Thomas Henderson when he politely requested, and once with Martha's foreman, a gentleman in his 50s who was light on his feet despite his cowboy boots. She avoided the punch after Cook warned her that someone always spiked it heavily, and she needed her wits about her. Around 9 o'clock, as the dancing reached its peak and the noise level climbed, Lila stepped outside for air. The night had cooled pleasantly, and stars scattered across the sky in their millions. She walked a little way from the hall, breathing deeply and letting the quiet soothe her. Quite a performance in there. A woman's voice, unfamiliar and edged with something unpleasant. Lila turned to find a woman perhaps 30 years old, beautiful in a hard way, with elaborately curled blonde hair and a dress cut more provocatively than anyone else's at the social. She stood with two other women, both younger and clearly following her lead. "I'm sorry," Lila said carefully. "Playing the brave frontier wife, negotiating contracts, pulling guns on men. Very dramatic." The blonde smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Vivian Cole. I run the hotel in town, and I think you should know, Jonah Mercer and I have history." The two younger women giggled, and Lila felt ice form in her stomach. "History. We were involved, before he decided he needed a wife." Vivian moved closer, her perfume cloying in the fresh air. "For 3 years, actually. He'd come to town every few weeks, visit me at the hotel. We had an arrangement." "Then you know he's married now," Lila said, keeping her voice level despite the emotions churning inside her. "Which means any arrangement is over." "Is it? Men have needs, Mrs. Mercer, especially men like Jonah. Big appetites, shall we say. Can a little thing like you really satisfy a man that size?" Vivian's smile turned cruel. "Or will he come back to someone who knows how to handle him?" The two younger women laughed again, clearly enjoying this confrontation. Lila felt heat rise in her face, part embarrassment, part anger, part a complicated tangle of emotions she couldn't name. She thought about the separate bedrooms, the careful distance Jonah maintained, the wedding night that had never really happened. "What Jonah and I have is between us," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And I'd suggest you focus on your own business rather than someone else's marriage. I'm just offering friendly advice. Men like him, they're not meant for domestic life, too wild, too rough. You'll bore him within months and he'll come looking for something more exciting." Vivian leaned in. "When he does, I'll be waiting." "Are you quite finished?" Martha's voice cut through the darkness like a whip. She emerged from the shadows near the hall, her expression thunderous. "Because if you're done embarrassing yourself, Vivian, perhaps you should head back inside. Or better yet, head home." Vivian straightened, but her composure slipped slightly. Martha Brennan clearly outranked her in the local social hierarchy. "I was just having a conversation. You were being petty and cruel to a woman who's done nothing to you except marry a man you never had any claim on." Martha's voice could have cut glass. "Jonah paid for services rendered, same as any other customer at your hotel. That's not a relationship, Vivian. That's business. If you can't understand the difference, that's your failing, not his." The two younger women had gone silent, eyes wide. Vivian's face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Furthermore," Martha continued, "if I hear you've been spreading rumors or making Lila's life difficult, you'll find that women in this territory have long memories. Make an enemy of her, you make an enemy of me. And I suspect Eleanor Henderson and half the respectable women in 3 counties would feel the same way. So choose your battles wisely." Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, then spun on her heel and stalked back toward the hall, her companions scurrying after her. Martha waited until they were gone, then turned to Lila. "You all right?" Yes, thank you." Lila's hands were shaking, and she clasped them together. Was she telling the truth? About her and Jonah? Probably. Jonah's a man, and men have needs. Before you came, he visited town regularly, and Vivian runs what you might call an exclusive establishment for gentlemen with money. Martha's tone was matter of fact. But that was before. He's married now, and Jonah's nothing if not honorable. If he made vows to you, he'll keep them. We haven't, Lila stopped, mortified at what she'd almost said. Haven't consummated the marriage? Martha's expression softened. I figured as much from how carefully he's been treating you. That's his way, Leela. He's giving you time, letting you adjust. But it's also eating at him. The waiting, the uncertainty, wondering if you'll ever want him that way. She paused. Vivian knows that, knows he's vulnerable right now. That's why she's struck. She's hoping to create doubt, create distance between you two. Well, it worked. Lila wrapped her arms around herself. I feel like an idiot. Like I don't know my own husband. Like I'm playing at being a wife without actually being one. You are a wife. You negotiated, you partnered, you're building something together. The physical part, that'll come when you're both ready. Don't let Vivian's poison rush you into something before it's right. Martha put a hand on Lila's shoulder. But maybe it's time to have an honest conversation with Jonah about expectations, about what you both want, about where this marriage is going. I don't know what I want, Lila admitted quietly. Then that's where you start, figuring that out, together. Martha squeezed her shoulder gently. Come on, let's go back inside. Don't give Vivian the satisfaction of seeing you rattled. They returned to the hall, and Lila immediately sought out Jonah. He was in his usual corner, looking uncomfortable and surrounded by 3 ranchers discussing cattle prices. His face brightened when he saw her, then clouded with concern when he registered her expression. What happened? He asked, extracting himself from the conversation. Can we go home? Please? He didn't ask questions, just nodded and began making their goodbyes. Within 10 minutes, they were in the wagon heading back to the ranch, the lamplight from the hall fading behind them. The silence was heavy, weighted with unspoken things. Vivian Cole talked to you, Jonah said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes. She told me about your arrangement before we married. Jonah's jaw tightened. What I did before we married is my business. But since it's clearly going to be an issue, yes, I visited Vivian when I came to town. I paid for company. It was a transaction, nothing more. She seems to think it was more. She can think whatever she wants. It doesn't make it true. He glanced at Lila. I'm not ashamed of it. I was lonely, I had needs, and I handled them in a way that hurt no one. But that stopped the day I sent you that train ticket. I made a commitment, and I keep my commitments. We're not really married, though, Lila said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Not in the way that matters. Separate rooms, careful distance, living like roommates more than husband and wife. Jonah pulled the wagon to a stop, even though they were still a mile from home. He turned to face her, his expression difficult to read in the darkness. Is that what you think? That we're not really married? I don't know what I think. I'm grateful for the respect, for the space you've given me. But Vivian's right about one thing. You're a man with needs, and I'm... She gestured helplessly at herself. I'm not equipped to handle them. Eventually, you'll get tired of waiting, and you'll go back to women like her who know what they're doing. Lila. Jonah's voice was rough. Look at me. She did, meeting his pale eyes in the starlight. I married you because I wanted a partner, yes, but also because something in your letters spoke to me. Intelligence, strength, practicality. You weren't trying to be something you're not, weren't selling me romance. You were honest. He paused. Since you got here, you've been everything I hoped for and things I didn't dare hope for. You're brave, capable, learning faster than anyone I've ever seen, and damn it, you're beautiful. Not in some delicate, fragile way, but in a way that's real and strong. I'm not beautiful, Lila protested. I'm plain and small, and you're beautiful to me. The words were simple, definitive. And as for needs, yes, I have them. But they're not just physical. I need someone who challenges me, who stands up to me when I'm being stubborn, who makes me think and laugh and remember I'm more than just work and survival. You do that. You've done that since the moment you pulled out that contract in front of everyone. Then why the separate rooms? Why the distance? Because I scared Mary Webb so badly, she left without looking back. Because I know what I am. Too big, too rough, too much for most women. Because I didn't want to pressure you, didn't want you to feel trapped. His hand found hers, engulfing it. But if you're asking whether I want more, want us to be married in every sense, then yes. God, yes. I just didn't know if you did. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm afraid, she admitted. Vivian's right that I don't know what I'm doing. I've never, with anyone, and you're so much larger, and I don't know how it would even work. And, hey, Jonah's thumb rubbed gentle circles on her hand. We figure it out together, carefully, slowly, at whatever pace you need. I told you I can be gentle, and I meant it. But Lila, there's no timeline here. If you're not ready, that's fine. If you're never ready, we'll figure out how to live with that. What I won't do is pressure you or make you feel like you're failing at being a wife. But what about your needs? I've been handling my own needs for 43 years. I'll survive. His voice turned wry. Won't kill me to wait until you're actually interested instead of just fulfilling some perceived obligation? What if I'm interested but terrified? The question hung between them, and Lila couldn't believe she'd said it. But it was true. Some part of her was curious, was drawn to this man who'd shown her respect and kindness and a gentleness that contradicted his massive frame. But another part was still scared of the physical reality, of vulnerability, of giving up one more piece of control. Then we go slow, Jonah said simply. Start small. Build trust. There's no rulebook that says we have to consummate the marriage on any particular timeline. We do what feels right for both of us, when it feels right. What does start small mean? Whatever you want it to mean. Spending time together in the evenings instead of retreating to separate rooms. Talking more, maybe. Learning to be comfortable with each other. He paused. Maybe you'd consider moving into my room, not for relations, just for sleeping, so we can get used to sharing space. Or I could move into yours if that feels safer. The idea sent a thrill of nervousness and something else through her. That seems like it would lead to expectations. Only expectations we agree on ahead of time. We can set ground rules, just like your contract. What's acceptable, what's not, where the boundaries are. His expression turned almost amused. You negotiated marriage terms in front of half the territory. You can negotiate bedroom terms with just me. Despite her nerves, Lila felt herself smile. That's true. I suppose I could draw up another contract. If that's what makes you feel safe, then yes, write it down, we'll both sign it, and we'll stick to it exactly. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with surprising delicacy. What matters is that we're partners in this, Lila. Not just in running the ranch, but in figuring out what our marriage looks like. There's no right or wrong way to do it, except what works for us. They sat in the stopped wagon under the vast Montana sky, and Lila felt something